Hello there, guys. I'm here to talk to you about utilitarianism and the basics of it, really. Act and Rule utilitarianism, who coined it, why is utilitarianism a thing, and what does it actually mean? This is purely for A-level revision, in my opinion. I'm doing this kind of for myself, but if there's anyone out there that learns from this, that is kind of useful. So I'm not saying this as someone who will. I'm not saying it as an educator. I can't tell you that what I'm saying is 100% factually correct, but I believe I am giving the best overview I can of utilitarianism in this situation. So when you think of utilitarianism, you need to look at the key thinkers first. There are two main key thinkers in my opinion. There is Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. Now, Jeremy Bentham was born in London, died in London, and was the founder of utilitarianism, or known as classic or act utilitarianism. When it comes to it, he is seen as the founder of it, and he also would teach John Stuart Mill when he was young. So he was kind of the teacher of John Stuart Mill, who later would develop rural utilitarianism, but he never really used the term himself for rural utilitarianism. Now, let's just look a little bit into Jeremy Bentham here. He is the founder of classic utilitarianism, also known as act utilitarianism, and he believes in the two sovereign masters. Now, these are pleasure and pain. Now, these two sovereign masters are a key point of utilitarianism, and the next point as well. We only have the desire to chase pleasure, and we should maximize utility. These are the two main points of utilitarianism. If you ever take anything away from utilitarianism, these are the things you should take away. The main goal is to chase pleasure and maximize utility. Now, Bentham himself starts to differ from others when he with the hedonic calculus. Now, this isn't used in other versions of utilitarianism. He has a view on things, so his hedonic calculus is coined with multiple different ways to justify good. Now, he doesn't believe in there being any rules, so there's no universal rules or moral norms. So that is a thing that kind of differs from most views of philosophical ways of viewing things. There normally is set rules. There's normally boundaries, but Bentham doesn't believe in that. He thinks that you should think about every situation no matter what. It's a consequentialist theory, which means that you think about what the outcome is going to be, not what you are doing at the time. And it is hedonistic, which is the pleasure being the sole intrinsic good. That is big for anyone who is doing A level. You want to know these words. It being consequentialist and it being hedonistic, that is big and important. You can also remember it using the hedonic calculus, hedonic, hedonistic. And obviously it is maximizing utility means the greatest good for the greatest number. That's just a basic overview for now. Let's get a little bit deeper into this, looking at pleasure and pain and the sole intrinsic good. So the core idea of utilitarianism is the idea that you should chase pleasure because pleasure is good. And you should avoid pain because pain is bad. And this is where the sole intrinsic good comes from. Pleasure is the sole intrinsic good. There is no other way to describe good in Bentham's view. If you were to describe good, you would describe pleasure. And if you were to describe pleasure, you describe good. It's a pretty simple view of things, and it does kind of fall into a gap here that we will get into later when we come to criticizing Bentham's view on things. Now, it's a consequentialist theory. Moving on, sorry. It's a consequentialist theory here. So, as I brought up earlier, we think about the consequences of the actions. You don't think about what happens at the time. So you want to think about the consequences and what it's going to do to the people around you and what it's going to do to yourself. So when it comes to consequentialism, there is a lot of consequentialist theories, but this is one that will think about a lot about the people around you and the greater good, quote unquote greater good, I will say. And the hedonic calculus will help you find out what is the best way to maximize this know what you're going to get consequentially from it. Now, the hedonic calculus is very flawed in its concept, which, again, there is a lot of criticism, so we will be getting into later. But for now, we will look at it from a purely strict view of what Bentham wants. So you have a hedonic calculus that will help you bring the most pleasure or the most pain for yourself. Now, there are no set rules, so Bentham fully believes that we should not have rules and not set goals, no matter the situation. So this is a very interesting view of things. So obviously this would fly in the face of religion. The Ten Commandments being very important for religion. Bentham throws that away. Bentham is actually not religious in of himself, and actually will fly in the face of it by not setting rules. And this is a purely godless theory. So that is something you might want to remember for yourselves, that God is not involved at any point during this entire utilitarianism spree. So he fully believes that there are no rules, and every situation should be run by the calculus, no matter how ridiculous it may be, because you never know what will be the case. Now, when you think of the hedonic calculus, you need to run it by a table. So when you have a situation, let's take a situation, for example. Actually, hold on. I'm going to take you onto my PC for a second. Paint 3D. Let's see here. Let's say you have a situation where you need to let's say save a dog. A dog's about to get run over and you should save it. It's not your dog, it's some other guy's dog. It would be a pretty pure pleasure, which is the P. Pure pleasure? Yeah, saving a dog's life, that's pretty pure. How rich is the pleasure? How good is the pleasure? Like, how morally, not morally right, but I'm trying to find a way to describe it, but how rich is the pleasure? Yeah, it's a pretty rich pleasure. How intense is the pleasure? Saving someone's life must fill you with adrenaline. That would be a pretty nice pleasure, wouldn't it? How certain would you be that you're getting the pleasure? If you save the dog's life, it's a pretty certain pleasure. You're saving the life of an animal, and you also are helping out a person because it's not your dog. How far is the extent of the pleasure? How far reaching is it? You're not the only one getting the pleasure. The dog's getting the pleasure that it gets to live, and the owner of the dog and the family of the dog is getting the pleasure that the dog is still alive. So again, very good. How long is the duration? You'll probably be thinking about it for quite a while. So yeah, that's probably quite a good pleasure. And how remote is the pleasure? So how far-reaching is the pleasure? Yeah, I would say that's quite a far-reaching pleasure. So, did I? No, yeah. So, how far-reaching is the pleasure? Yeah, it's a pretty far-reaching pleasure because it goes around for quite a while. So, an act like this would be quite obviously good. 7 out of 7. I think most people would reach this conclusion. But that's normally how you use the calculus. You would look at the major centers here: purity, richness, the remoteness, the intensity, the certainty, the extent, and the duration of the pleasure. These are the main points of hedonic calculus, and if you are doing this at A level, you should know these. You want to drill those into your head. You want to keep them in the back of your mind. This can also tie into the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, because obviously extent and remoteness obviously account for the amount of people that you are bringing pleasure to. Now back into the slides here. I hope that we don't get taken back to the start. Yep, perfect. Now that's the hedonic calculus as well, set out. Now, this is the big point, is criticisms of Bentham, and we will be spending a while here because there is quite a few. Now, when you use the hedonic calculus like I did earlier, someone might have thought, back onto this, someone might think it's not a pure act to save a dog and it's God's divine will to save that dog, to end that dog's life randomly. So now you end up with 6 out of 7. And I would have got 7 out of 7 on that, but someone else got 6 out of 7. And that leads to a interesting situation where the hedonic calculus seems to be airtight, but it really isn't at the core, because it really does depend on who you ask. It does vary depending on the person that you ask. Now, also here, there is no clear definition of good. Now, when you ask Bentham, what is your definition of good? He would say pleasure. And if you asked him what his definition of pleasure would be, it would be pleasure is good. So you would fall into this trap pretty quickly. Sorry, this is the wrong one. I've skipped a bit ahead of here. But yeah, the fallacy of composition here. You are describing something by using its own term. So it's not ideal to follow that, because there is no clear definition of pleasure or good. This one is a bit controversial as criticism, but people will say animals being counted on the same level as humans is a heavy criticism. You should not count them on the same level, because then, how many animals are you going to account for? Because there's millions and millions and millions of ants, and there's only so many humans. Should we just value the ants over everyone? Then we start to get into some muddy waters. So this leads into the tyranny of the majority, which Mill will point out later. So the tyranny of the majority is the belief that 51% of the people can rule over 49 because they have the majority, no matter the situation. That's how utilitarianism views it, at least. And this is also kind of leading into using the rules, or the lack of rules even, to justify things that could not be justified, such as genocide or something like that. Someone could use the hedonic calculus in a way that will only lead to what they want. So they could say that it's a pure pleasure to, do something horrific, even though most people would disagree with that. It's personal views when it comes to the hedonic calculus. Bentham would say you're using the hedonic calculus wrong, but that's just neither here nor there. And this is also the lack of defense for the minorities, because they're the minority and it's the greatest good for the greatest number. And finally, the hedonic calculus is kind of hard to use in a quick situation. If there's a car flying towards another person, you can't go through the hedonic calculus quickly, because the car will hit them by the time you finish the hedonic calculus, or even before that. So there are a couple criticisms of ACT utilitarianism and Bentham, and you can also use some of these to criticize raw utilitarian. Speaking of raw utilitarianism, it's John Stuart Mill. He didn't coin the term raw utilitarianism, but he himself was probably a raw utilitarian. He agrees that the sole thing we chase is pleasure, but he thinks that we need to chase higher pleasures, not lower pleasures. Now, this is something that we will talk on, and we will criticize him for later as well, because he is a very interesting individual when it comes to pleasure. He believes that rules are needed for social order, but to maximize happiness as well. And he will later move towards the strong versus rural utilitarians. He wrote one of the most famous books in philosophy, or not even philosophy really, but it's called On Liberty. It's a very famous book, and he very fiercely criticizes censorship in his book, and he accounts for a harm principle. This is something that Bentham doesn't address himself. He never points out anything to do with harm, so it was just what's the greatest good for the greatest amount. Now, when we think of Mill, he changes the idea of pleasures, saying that we should chase only higher pleasures. So these higher pleasures would be something that challenges the mind, not something that would just something that will just bring you happiness randomly, Oh, let me just play some video games, let me just play a GTA 5 would be a lower pleasure, because you're not thinking too much, you're not really learning, you're just letting it be. Whereas if you were to go play chess instead, Mill would say that's very good, that's a higher pleasure. You should definitely do that because it's challenging your mind and it's something that will bring you later pleasure as well. He often uses the term, it's better to be a sad human than a happy pig. That would lead to him being viewed as quite a snob, though. Like, the higher versus lower pleasures thing, higher pleasures are often inaccessible for lower people, opera, expensive food, something cooking for yourself. Things like that could be seen as quite difficult to access for someone from a lower class background, and Mill would be later criticised for being a snob. He has fierce views on censorship, though, and other people criticising. So, he believes that you have the complete freedom to act however you want as long as it brings you pleasure. But this is with a big caveat, as long as you don't harm other people. Now, he says that you have the freedom to swing your fists as much as you want, but it ends at the tip of another man's nose. So, that is the belief that as long as you aren't hurting someone physically, also big point there, it is only physically that you get harmed. That is the important part. It shows that you have the freedom to do what you want. So you also have the freedom to free speech as long as that doesn't incite physical violence. So you can say whatever you want. You can go out on the street and preach whatever you want as long as you aren't inciting violence against other people. And he believes that people who follow these views, who live the way they want, and will bring themselves happiness, will lead to a happy society. But this is in of itself an is-ought gap. Like, he believes that because people are happy, happy people will lead to a happy society, or happy people ought to lead to a happy society. But it doesn't end that way because people clash on their views. There are strong versus weak rule utilitarians, or strong and weak rule utilitarians, sorry. A strong rule utilitarian will believe that rules should not be broken no matter the situation. This will end in less pleasure and more pain if you break the rules, although this could be twisted in some scenarios where you can lead that way. A weak rule utilitarian will try to stick to the rules, but if there is a situation where they believe that more pleasure is to be gained by breaking those rules, they will do as such, and less pain, obviously. I should probably just say more pleasure, because it implies less pain. Now, there is a lot of criticisms towards Mill. Mill is seen as a big snob. He is a rich man who is looking down on the poor. He does not believe that we do not believe that higher pleasures are as accessible to the masses as everyone else. So, playing chess is pretty easily accessible, but going to an opera, or going on a cruise, something like that, something that will bring you higher pleasure, would not necessarily, or maybe not going on a cruise, sorry, that is probably a bad view, but higher pleasures were seen as something that only the rich could do at the time, whereas, lower pleasures were easily accessible by everyone. Now, Mill also has a harm principle, which seems great on the surface. Yes, you should not harm others, but it only points towards physical harm. He has no regard for mental or psychological harm. Now, this is a key point and a key criticism that you can use against both of them almost, because obviously Bentham doesn't account for harm at any point in his views either. Mill has no regard for animals. There is no defense of them, and this is the opposite of Bentham, but you can use either one depending on how you view things, but you can't use them both. If you use them both, you will be flip-flopping, and you wouldn't want to do that in your essays. Now, if you're a strong rule utilitarian, it could lead to some major cracks in putting pleasure first. If you follow the rules to a T, then, you could be sacrificing moments of pleasure, which would kind of break the entire point of utilitarianism. And he never tries to convince anyone. He just says pleasure is good as a matter of fact, and this in of itself is an is-ought gap, as we pointed out earlier. A happy group of people should lead to a happy society, or ought to lead to a happy society, and it just isn't that way, because, like I said, clashing views can lead to people becoming unhappy with each other. You know, if someone wants to walk around naked, that would make someone who doesn't want to see that quite upset, and they wouldn't be happy. It's something along those lines, and you can't describe what is good by his idea. It's the fallacy of composition. You know, it's, well, not fallacy of composition, sorry. It's he's saying you should chase pleasure because pleasure is good and good is pleasure, but there is no justification for that. There is no main way to describe it. He uses the same term to describe itself, and that is a big key point in utilitarianism that you might want to criticize. The fallacy of composition itself is obviously along the lines of the is-ought gap as well. Is, if everyone's happy, then, you know, everyone else will be happy. You know, a happy person will lead to a happy society, but that just isn't the case, because there are a lot of people with a lot of different views and a lot of different ways that they want to do things. So you know, there is a big criticism to be had there in Mill's views, where, you know, he doesn't really account for everyone being different. He just assumes that everyone's going to be happy if they all chase higher pleasures, and that just isn't the case. I do want to just put some questions down here at the end of the video. It's a pretty weak video, I must admit. I have missed one or two things out, but I hope I've covered enough utilitarianism to satisfy some people. So these are some questions that you might want to answer yourselves, just to use your own maybe put on a utilitarian view, or use your own view, or maybe do both. Is there a situation where it might be right to kill someone? Especially in utilitarianism, there would be situations, but should mental harm be considered in the harm principle? What do you think? Is the tyranny of the majority a real issue, or does the majority rule not affect you? Should there be a defense of minorities, or should it just be majority rule? Should the greatest good be put first? Is the hedonic calculus actually effective in your eyes? And would you rather be a happy pig or a sad human? These are just a couple questions to put to you. Maybe you want to answer them yourselves. Maybe you want to answer them from a utilitarian view. Or maybe you want to answer them from a critical utilitarian view. Maybe you want to criticize them at the same time. Who knows? I do apologize if this video is not the most accurate or the best, but I hope I've laid down a couple of the decent rules of utilitarianism for you to look over, and hopefully this will help you maybe refresh your memory or revise a little bit. That'll be all from me for today, and that was Act versus Rule Utilitarianism and Jeremy Bentham and Stuart Mill. I hope that has satisfied yourselves.